Welcome, Third Rock listeners, to the Branding Laboratory. I'm your host, Deevo, Chief Experience Officer for the Brand Storyteller and the Fusion Creative Brands. And each week, I have the privilege of speaking with extraordinary leaders and entrepreneurs who are reshaping the way industries work. These conversations go way beyond the surface to explore the core philosophies, the lessons, and the challenges that define the brands that we admire today. And one of the greatest rewards of this podcast is the opportunity to share the insights of some of the brightest minds in business, people who are passionate about pushing boundaries and redefining what's possible. And as I always say, the stories we tell are the brands we build. And this show is a testament to the power of that concept. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Branding Laboratory, where we strip away the fluff and we dive into the real and raw conversations with entrepreneurs and CEOs and business leaders who are making a difference on this wonderful blue planet of ours. It's not just another branding podcast. It's a no BS exploration of what makes brands tick. And it generally centers around their people, which is why this is a podcast for CEOs. And I love to learn about the challenges that these leaders are facing and the stories that have shaped their success. And it's my mission to shine a light on them so that you can learn from them, so that you can make more of a difference like they are. So I'm your host, Deevo. I am the Chief Experience Officer for the Brand Storyteller and the Fusion Brands. I am a master photographer. I have been doing that for over 20 years. I'm a brand strategist and a serial entrepreneur who is now on his fourth business, and I'm still trying to learn. I'm a curiosity seeker, and one of the reasons I started this show is so that I could piggyback and learn from some of these amazing CEOs and leaders that I bring on. And again, my mission is to help leaders and small business owners cut through the noise, tell their authentic story, and build brands that really, truly connect and resonate with their audience. And today's guest is no exception to that rule. We are going to be cutting through some of the corporate jargon with our guest, Courtney Lukitsch. And she knows how to shake things up. She is a CEO and the founder of Gotham PR, which is a powerhouse strategic marketing and branding agency in New York. And somehow or other, we got her on the show. I'm not really sure how, but I'm really excited to interview her and chat with her and explore her brain and all the great things that she's doing and learn how I can be just like her when I grow up. So here it is. Courtney, welcome to the show. Courtney Lukitsch, she is the CEO and founder of Gotham PR. Welcome to the show. Courtney is we were talking about disrupting, but you're a powerhouse in this idea of, and I want to talk about this because you have a couple of things in your deck that you sent over, your PR team did: strategic forecasting, change management, and crafting high stakes media partnerships. But my takeaway from reading through your business, by the way, I love your website. It's simple, to the point, and not a lot of like nonsensical things. But you rewrite rules from what I can tell. Sort of, you're like creating your own landscape with marketing, media, roadmaps, guiding businesses, all the things, brand development. And so I got the impression that you were a disruptor, which is why I told Melissa, let's get her on the show. I'd really like to learn from her. And so I thought we'd have a cool conversation on early stages of your business, where the idea come from, what was your journey, how did you get into that space, and then go from there. Does that sound cool?
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for the foresight and sort of understanding my multi-hyphenate background and level of interest, engaging in all things visionary. And yes, we very much so create categories. We don't sort of just sit inside them. So I think that was sort of the genesis. And again, Gotham is another term for New York City, harkens from Batman. We like to have a sense of humor in as much as we do very serious work. So it has served us very well.
How are you creating categories? Because that sounds cliche and really fantastically wonderful, but how are you creating categories? What does that actually mean?
Well, you would be surprised. Companies come to us offering or innovating something that's not yet available in the market. And on the media side, we often have to educate and create parameters for a new kind of storytelling, because I know that you're both a visual and a narrative storyteller. And this has really been the sweet spot, I think, of the agency over the past decade or 15 years is disrupting in a way or innovating in a way that the market had not seen. And I know that sounds like one thing when you're sitting in the world of technology, and I do have a technology background. So that's a through line that runs through all of the creative processes. So now fast forward to 2024, we're working with a leader in rapid prototyping. And so we can take a concept, we can create a whole master rollout and deliver an activation, as we call it in architectural terms, within a 2-week time span. So, I mean, you see the acceleration, right, of sort of concept to reality or installation. And then these all manifest as in-person experiences, which then, of course, crosses over into social. So I know I'm speaking in a kind of very metaverse type fashion, but I think that the world is really craving in-person experience, right? We've been online and we're so fixated online, probably most of us 20 hours a day, that getting back to human scale in-person experience becomes that much more valuable. So I know I digress from the original question, but
well, before you actually answer the original question, so break that down for me in terms of an actual real client. What does that look like?
sure.
And
Well,
what's the actual solution that you're implementing?
oh, okay. Well, visionary thinkers and ideators come to us saying, hey, let's do some press around X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
What they don't know is that our firm really offers very hands-on, high-level business development and marketing capabilities as well. So really, it's a 360 way of looking at a problem and a potential solution. And oftentimes a client or a visionary creator will be so close to what it is that they're doing or creating that they don't objectively see sometimes the business opportunity. And so we come in and do an audit or what we'd call a roadmap, right, to create viable pathways for new partnerships, new ways of communicating, or elevating something that's maybe 15 years old into a current sort of forecast, right? So I know this all sounds slightly ephemeral, so ask me some more questions and I'll give you more specific answers.
So you're actually in this particular example you're giving. It sounds like you're changing a philosophical structure of something, or an ethos around what a brand formerly
Yes.
envisioned or formerly lived, and trying to change the culture in terms of taking on a new transformation. Is that what I'm hearing you
I
say?
mean, people come to us anything from a launch to a reposition to succession or legacy kind of plan. And so it's really fascinating because I think we're working, and I don't know if you are, but we are in a workplace that has, upwards of 4 or 5 different generations. So you're dealing with founders who are sometimes extremely senior, they
Mm-hmm.
can be in their 80s to people just starting the careers in their 20s and
Mm-hmm.
having them interface and learn how to communicate with each other internally. I think there's a tendency still to silo activities. And I mean, I think the goal is to be horizontal, right? But so many companies fall into that tendency of still operating vertically. And so the youngest members on the team aren't necessarily benefiting from the more seasoned professionals. So our job is to come in and to kind of realign and make sure that everybody's operating on the same strategy, on the same level of forecasting, and the results can really be astounding. We're working with a company right now that has done more in 6 months than most companies are able to accomplish in several years because we were able to align all of those interests. And because they are vertically integrated, they're able to move quickly and do multiple things at the same time. I think you mentioned you have a corporate background. There's a tendency to be like, okay, with this quarter, we can do this quarter, we can do this quarter, we can maybe do this. Whereas if you start looking at the 3-quarter year, if you're familiar with that book, and I'm guessing you are,
Mm-hmm.
or that philosophy, right, you can really accomplish a tremendous amount in a short period of time. So we're the sort of optimization agency, and that's not about publicity. So anybody who wants this sort of buzzy, fun, events-driven stuff, yes, we can do it, but that's not really what people hire us for. They hire us for a very high-level engagement, like how do I radically transform our business, knowing that the only constant is change, and how do you motivate our team to embrace that and the fact that it's necessary, probably for the survival of a lot of companies, because I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation, as things start to shift into the next quarter and the next year. I think there will be, particularly in our industry, the branding, marketing, advertising, communication world.
You talked about a vertical horizontal, and I just had a couple of questions that because I've dealt with corporations in my own experience working in that world, and the differences between those different business models. Because halfway through my corporate career, we were bought out. We were a vertical, clear chain of command, top down business. Good old boys from from the South. They were bought by a company from New York who was nothing but horizontal. And one of the things that I learned really quickly on, because I was an officer in the company, so I got to sit in on all the meetings and all the long snoozers. But
Decision making, yes.
somebody asked me what my favorite part of being, why I left the corporate world is I don't have to go to any more meetings anymore, man. I get to call the meetings when the necessary. I used to sit there and be like, come on, man. We could have done this in like 6 minutes, bro. We didn't need to be here for 62 minutes. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Forgive me. No offense to the meeting people. One of the things I saw really early on when that buyout occurred and they basically left the same people in place with the exception of the CEO is that there was a really slow shift philosophically. Vertical corporations have a clear chain of command. In this case, there was a very clear top-down chain of command. Employees were very specialized in very niche pockets throughout the business. Like, it wasn't uncommon that dude would be punching staplers for 26 years, like Milton in the same cubicle, right? And so it was very specialized. There were very clearly defined career paths within that. So, like, you came in as a marketing individual, you were expecting, at least when I was there, you were expected to sort of follow that career path all the way up to VP of marketing type of thing. And one of the things that I saw really quickly, because the company did not integrate what you're doing, this optimization, if you will, and I want to hear about how you would change, is they just basically made a shift at the CEO. They appointed a new CEO, but there was no cultural changes. And so everybody was like, it was really slow to kind of buy into it. We had a lot of people who left the business because they became alienated, and there were some really talented people that walked away from their niche careers because they just didn't want to deal with this sudden shift because there was just poor communication. Nobody knew really what was going on except that we were suddenly a horizontal company, and like 96% of the people don't even know what that means back in those days. Right. So, yeah. So all things being equal, and you're charged with taking over a company that is a vertical top-down business, and they say, get Courtney in here, she's the disruptor, she's going to clean the house and get things optimized. What does that look like for you, like on a high level? Like, what's the first thing you do as a consultant coming in to help a company optimize and changing their entire philosophical approach to business?
Right. Well, apart from not cleaning house, because I think that expression has a negative connotation, and obviously you lived through it, probably in more than one environment, as have I. The idea is really to invite people into the process, right? So it's about culture and communicating in a way that invites people in to hear their voices. Obviously, there's still going to be, the decision makers that sit in on the meetings, as opposed to maybe all 200 or 500 people in a company, right? But the idea is to streamline and create an approach that is understandable and can be embraced almost immediately by the wider company, right? To then sort of motivate or galvanize the longer process. And we've seen that successfully, particularly over the past 4 years, which, as you might imagine, have been very challenging. We showed up for smaller companies and studios that had, 10 employees, between 10 and 25 employees. And now we've circled back to working for companies again that have at least 200 to 500 employees. And we've even got involved on the equity side. So that's also been a really, I'm a big fan of constantly upskilling. I feel that that's why a lot of really incredibly visionary and intelligent people come to us, because they realize that we're operating on a very sophisticated level. And that means being able to look at the financial, look at the business development, look at the marketing, look at the digital, look at the social, and find the intersection or through line to help take that business to the next level. And that also involves some of the partnerships that we discussed at the top of this call. So when that kind of programming is created, then you can communicate to the marketplace in a very integrated manner, right? And then you can also go out to bigger partners and say, this is what we bring. So when you asked at the beginning of the call, what do we solve? Well, we take companies that somehow maybe feel like they've lost their voice. They never had a voice because they never communicated to the market. They did it either in sort of a B2B or B2B2C manner. And so they are taking the reins on their own sort of brand identity and speaking out, right? I think to your point, there's a lot of companies that feel comfortable just letting their clients do their work for them, and that's okay too.
Mm.
Right? That's sort of the B2B vibe. So there's a lot to be said in that kind of co-branding affiliation space. It's very powerful, particularly when you're looking at Gen Z consumers, right? And how they like to be communicated with, right? There's an authenticity there. There's an integrity. They don't necessarily want to be sold to, like many of the, organizations and firms and brands that we work with. So it's a very nuanced way of communicating. It's very targeted. And so I'm sure since you're a branding expert as well, there's a lot to be said for demographics and psychographics. I mean, we're seeing it in the national election. I even worked on a senatorial campaign, and now that's, heading into the White House, that person, so prospectively. So it's all very interesting when you start looking at how communicating with younger generations and how they consume media and what branding looks like and what those channels have to be so much more visually appealing, so much more compelling in their messaging, and so constant, right? In their sort of prolific outreach. So yeah, it's an art form, and one that, as you said, is constantly evolving, right? Depending on who you're communicating with.
Well said. I think one of the things I pulled from you is it's a macro micro perspective on things, and just to continue with the same paradigm of optimizing a business going from vertical to horizontal. One of the things that I saw early on is that they had not, the new management, the new ownership, did not clearly articulate any sort of vision, and they didn't share any sort of messaging with not only the leaders and the stakeholders, but just the population at large. And so there was a lot of buyer confusion on, is my role secure? What is my new role? There's all these new managers coming in. And so there was no definition or redefinition, if you will, of roles and responsibilities, and fostering this new culture that was coming in. And there was just so many things that could have been done in it. The company ended up not lasting. I think it was 3 years. I left before that. But they no longer exist. And one of the reasons that they don't exist is because I don't think they did a very good job in the transition, which is one of the things that you focus on. You talked about, You've been doing this for what? How many years? 20 years or so?
As Gotham PR, 22 years, but prior to that, I worked at several other New York agencies. And I mean, I think you said it very well, that innovation is born out of these challenges, and also as leaders and sort of chronic serial entrepreneurs, yourself, myself, we always see the upside, right? And we've learned from these environments where we're like, I'm never going to be like that, because you see early on the wasted resources, right, and talent in those scenarios. So my position has always been to train people the right way. I mean, I've launched a lot of people's careers, and they've gone on to do amazing things by the time they're 30 years old. Most of them are vice presidents or running their own companies or have all these great things going on, because when you learn the right way, right, you don't lose time, you don't lose motivation, and if anything, you get the confidence to understand that the funnest part of business is new business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The problem with that statement, and this is not a problem with what you said, the problem with that statement, and just for people listening, is that not everybody is a Courtney Lukitsch. Not everybody is an innovator. Not everybody can sort of see both the macro and the micro viewpoints of things and be able to either transition or predict what could happen. So, there's a lot of people who are just working in a very specific role, especially when you're working with large corporations. So
Yes.
how do you foster a sense of innovation for someone who is just, and I don't want to sound crude, but just, he's a pedal pusher or she's a pedal pusher. Like, how do you foster a sense of innovation in a large corporation where somebody has a very specific niche role? They don't really care about the vision of these consultancy coming in or the new ownership. They just want to make sure they have their paycheck and they're doing a good job and their manager's rewarding them, and they sort of have this tunnel vision, if you will, right? So how do you, as an expert in this field, how do you change people's philosophies and ethoses that are not part of the leadership team?
No, I think that's a great question. Well, it's just to inspire thought first and foremost, right, as to what resources are available. And so many are available now that were not when I started this agency, quite frankly. So there's so many ways to upskill and learn new things. And I understand what you're saying, but I also think that people stay in that position to their detriment, right? Because I know a lot of people in the corporate world, and particularly in the corporate agency world and advertising. I mean, a lot of these huge companies are laying off massive amounts of people. And I think it is because they were so siloed and maybe got into that cubicle mentality that you described. So it's sort of do that at your peril moving forward, because with AI and all the things coming for our optimized workplace, you have to stay competitive. So I'm not sure those kind of jobs really are going to exist in another 5 years, truthfully.
How do you stay competitive? It's a really busy marketplace. There are a lot of people who do similar things to what you do, to what I do, to what corporations do. I mean, every day there's a buyout in the large companies. So,
Yeah.
how do you stay competitive? If you had to distill that down to a few tips and advice, how does an entrepreneur, how does a corporation stay competitive?
Well, to your earlier point, it is a noisy environment. And what's been fascinating to me, and it's probably because I've had the privilege of working in all over the country and all over the world. I mean, we have clients in 30 cities, 30 countries, and New York has a very um, go for it, full of opportunity mentality that you sometimes take one meeting and then you get to yes, which I think always, inspired and gave me confidence. But I have really built so many strong relationships and a professional network such that when I do create new programs for clients, it's often leaning into those relationships that were built one by
Mm-hmm.
one over time. And there is a circularity to that, if you're familiar with that terminology, and sort of this sustainable approach, not only to building something, but achieving success with significance, is to do it with a lot of integrity and to prove yourself every day. One thing that I noticed in your profile when I was doing some research was that you're very humble. And I think that there's a lot to being sort of a servant leader, right? And so it goes back to communicating with the junior people in an organization in as much as I'm spending time with the seniors, because the future of the company is really to bring up the younger employees through the organization
Mm-hmm.
if they're going to stay, right? And to give them those skills to sustain their careers or to be competitive. So I think that's not for everyone to go into entire companies and work at that level, right? So it's sort of being a coach, mentor, forecaster, strategist, and it's the few companies I think that are really going to excel that want to retain a service such as this, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not going to be for every single company.
You mentioned the circularity model and this idea of resource efficiency. Is there one common thread that you've seen in the 22 years of business in working with corporations specifically, I'm talking about, not entrepreneurs, that when you've gone in and looked at them from the inside out, outside in, that you can come back to your team and say, okay, guess what? They have this problem, or guess what? They have that problem. Is there a common thread that you see when you're being hired for your services of this optimization, if you will, this rebrand, this brand, et cetera?
Yes, and it's to get the initial buy-in from the, if not stakeholders, then decision makers. Because if we come in and we start
Wait,
asking a
no,
lot of
hold on.
questions,
Let me interrupt that. Sorry, I might have asked you incorrectly. When you go in and look at your clients, okay, you're charged with coming in and optimizing, cleaning up, and doing the things that you do best. When you look at all of the, if you can look back over the 22 years, can you find a common thread that you've seen in all of your clients that they were all suffering from?
well, I think an eagerness to change or evolve, they felt stuck.
Mm-hmm.
That's the short answer. And so I think bringing in someone outside who is completely objective and willing to tell the truth and not varnish it,
Mm-hmm.
which unfortunately a lot of consultants do, a lot of PR firms do. They will go in and, I think we all want to see the upside and everything, but to go in and tell the truth, but also with potential solutions and to forecast this is where you'll be in 6 months if you do A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at things in tiers or vertical tiers, tier one, here's the focus here, tier two, tier three, and you can get them to understand that there's a method, right, that's going to get them from where they're stuck right now to being unstuck in the new year, then most people are going to say, yes, we'll try that. And also if you make it, as we do, attainable within a shorter period of time and not saying, oh, this has to go on for 5 years. Well, most companies we do end up working with for 5, 10, 15 years because of the commensurate relationship and results. But in the beginning, to make it attainable and understandable is, I think, to break it into those 2 quarters. Like this, we can really do this in a short period of time if we have to, and we have the cooperation, as I cited in an earlier example of, we've probably done more in marketing in 6 months than they did in many years. So
How do you handle pushback? Especially you're an outsider, and not everybody necessarily appreciates the role that you play. I'm sure. How do you handle pushback in that capacity?
I love this question because it's something that I think about, and I'm very proud of myself because I've matured to the point where I can look at things again in a very clear manner. And this comes from experience. I can see the roadblocks. I can anticipate perhaps the personalities that could be better utilized in other areas of the organization. And so it's sort of this risk reward scenario of going in and telling the truth, and also just having companies look at things through a different lens. Yes, I think there is probably a fear factor, but there's also a level of excitement, right? When you bring in this new thinking that is almost anathema to an organization, like, whoa, I didn't even think we could be having this conversation, much
Mm.
less undertaking these kind of initiatives and getting this kind of traction so quickly. And what's great is, again, the junior staff always see it, and then the more seasoned people sometimes, even though they're the ones who invited us in, are the ones that have to be convinced. So it's, again, this sort of multi-generational, multi-level approach of creating a group that can really galvanize, right, the process. Like we can bring it in and we can offer it and we can definitely execute it, but it's not something that can be outsourced. Like, okay, here you go.
Mm.
This Gotham is going to go and do everything. We do a
Mm.
lot, certainly. But then when we start bringing in new business and we start generating partnerships and we start generating high level media interviews, like I always say, I open the door or window, you have to walk through it and you have to close. Like I will train you, but they always say, oh, can't you go on the record? Can't you do the interview? I'm like, well, I have been a spokesperson for many, many organizations and clients, but really my job is to educate you so that you can take your company forward. So
I love that you said that. I had a client a bit back that basically wanted me to hold his hand in every capacity.
yeah,
And and I understand, you're paying us money to optimize you or help you or digitize
yeah.
you or whatever the case may be. But our job is not to run your business. Our job is to help you see the pitfalls, the gaps, and read your label from the outside so that we can help shape the perception of your buyers. And then there are specific things that you're going to have to do as a business owner, operationally, philosophically, technically, tactically, that we're not charged to do, but for whatever reason that got lost in translation. So you being in my shoes as the CEO of my company and handling this client, how would you have tackled a challenge like that?
Well, it is interesting because we counter that almost weekly. We'll be involved with the CTO to help implement all of the infrastructural changes if we're relaunching the website, doing branding, and we're helping to produce events that require, high level audiovisual and speeches and panels. And you just gave a keynote today, so you understand what that means. All the way down to working with a branding partner and sometimes going through 15, 20, 50 iterations on something to get it perfect. It shouldn't take that many, but with the bigger companies, oftentimes it will. So to your point, yeah, we do get involved at every level. And I have to remind myself frequently, like, okay, we have to switch gears and focus on Gotham, right? And how we're evolving, how we're scaling the kind of work we're taking on, because it is enticing oftentimes when you're seeing such great results. You want to jump in, right?
Yeah.
You want to get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves and get things done. But really, I think our role, again, in a more senior position it's like being a trainer of trainers, if you're familiar with that
Yeah.
concept, right?
Yeah.
is giving them the tools. And then, of course, always being there as a sounding board. Like I'm always in the back coaching. And now, of course, the thing is to do it by text. So, oftentimes, like, right before I jumped on with you, I got a whole volley of 15 texts that I had to answer very quickly. So, gone are the days where it's an email and you have the luxury of responding whenever, which I was never trained to do that. I always answer within 5 minutes if I can. But now it's just this constant, as I say, leading from behind, right? And if you know the philosophy of leading from behind, you're really identifying the best practices of each individual on any respective team, right? And helping them move forward, albeit from a back position, as opposed to this top-down authority. And when I have to be the authority, I can certainly step in and do that and get somebody on the phone or take somebody to task, which typically I don't have to do too much of. But I think we see great rewards in that. And that can even be on the media and marketing side too, right? Like it's all relationship based. So we have to take our contacts at leading publications and broadcasters something very compelling. Like I'm not interested in wasting anybody's time. So unless it's really something that's going to be of interest to A, drive the business of the client, and B, help our editorial contacts, then we're not going to pursue it. So consequently, we have to build these sophisticated messaging programs. Otherwise, we're not going to get traction on any level. So it's like inner and outer. I know that movie's very popular right now, Inside and Outside, Inner and Outer, whatever it's called. In and out. So yeah, and unless you have sort of the inner communication established within an organization or a company, then you can't really effectively operate externally. Yes, if it's sort of like a tactical product, maybe, but not so much as a brand, if that makes sense.
In terms of your communication, you struck me as that because I had sent you a text message yesterday and you responded within seconds, and I was like, okay, this is my kind of person because I'm the same way. But there's also a downfall to that because with philosophical behavior of that nature, you tend to sort of always be available to people. And I have to remind myself, especially with my clients, that at some point I have to turn off. And you said something really interesting. You have to focus on Gotham as well. Like you are running a business. You can't always just be everybody else's leader, everyone else's implementer, everyone else's like tactical lead. So how do you shut off and just sort of manage that so that you're not always available 24/7?
This maybe is one of my favorite questions of all in this interview. I train my clients because, again, I work in a lot of different time zones in other countries to start very early in the morning. I think what the habit is when we go into companies is they see sort of the marketing PR function is, oh, I'll answer that at 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Whereas I train them now to respond very early in the morning so that we have the whole day to accomplish so many things. So whether we are working with the senior people, the junior people, I make sure that I communicate with them at least once every day to make sure they understand exactly what needs to happen, what approvals need to get done tactically, almost like the checklist, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I know that sounds like micromanaging, but once I do it, all the questions get answered by 10 a.m. Suddenly, there's a tectonic shift in positive activity because it has a ripple effect throughout the organization. And then I get them onto that rhythm. And then by the time Friday comes, the work is done, or we're anticipating, obviously, the coming 2 weeks, because I also try to train them to be whatever huge initiative we have, everything needs to be done a week in advance. And then that way at the last minute, we have available time to address any challenges that arise. So it's really like behavior modification in as much as it is all the other strategies that we've been discussing. And it really works. It's really fantastic. And then if anybody says, oh, I didn't see that, or I didn't get that email, or what have you, then, it's pretty well documented that the people who are paying attention early in the morning because we're the ones getting things done. And media love that too. I mean, it's just respectful of people's time, quite frankly.
That whole idea of behavior modification is something we should really hone in on for a second. I had an individual just this morning at this keynote, and he was sort of a non-believer in the idea of having to be on social media. He saw it as a waste of time. It was a time consumer, and he kept going down how he was getting sucked into this vacuous hole. And I literally said to him, like, because he asked a question and how am I supposed to play on the sandbox of social media to promote my business when I'm constantly left there scrolling through, thumbing through, and I was like, bro, it's called discipline. It's called
Yeah.
behavioral discipline. Like, if you can't control your own behavior and set some sort of standards for how much time you're going to be spending on social media outside of just doing work, then that's a totally different problem. And I run into that a lot, that whole idea of behavior modification in terms of running a business, in terms of scaling a brand, in terms of success versus not success. How much impact does one's own behavior and a team's own behavior modifications ultimately play into the success or failure of a business?
Great question. To address your initial point, algorithms are created to be clicky and sticky, right? To keep you
Mm.
there and to be addictive. So it's really channeling focus to where it's most needed. And I think that's where that early morning communication comes in. Like, hey, I know your day is going to be incredibly noisy, but if we can focus on these 5 things and get them accomplished, then it moves the needle forward for the, coming 48 hours, 72 hours, what have you. Not least of which we're dealing with summer hours. I don't know if that's a thing in the South as much as it is in the Northeast, but people take summer Fridays or they'll take 4-day weekends. So then you're really looking at almost like a compressed Monday through Wednesday work week where things
Mm-hmm.
need to get done. That crystallizes things very quickly when you have to have things done by close of the business on Wednesday, because everyone's going to check out and not tune back in until whenever they decide to show up. So it's a really interesting, I always see it as a chessboard, right? But I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you kind of did. Then went out. You, like me, you chased a squirrel.
Yeah.
Squirrel. In, in terms of, I guess where I was going is, let me see if I can rephrase it. So I think, especially with a legacy company, and then you work with you work with emerging brands and you work with legacy brands, and so this question might be more appropriate for this. How do you balance staying innovative with a new brand versus a legacy brand that has a bunch of traditions and ethos and philosophies and team that's been there long stead? How do you balance the two? But most importantly, back to my first question is, how much is behavior modifications play into scaling a brand, especially as it pertains to older brands that have sort of core values already
Yes.
established?
Thank you for restating that. And it really gets to the heart of what we deal with, routinely, is the legacy brands really want to operate as a startup.
Mm.
So it is reframing not only the structure, but the narrative around that, of how do you become almost like the pop-up or the launch pad within your very well-established company. We have a 35-year firm that we work with where we did just that. I think they were under the impression that they had a marketing department. They did not, ever. And so again, they had their own unique way of driving business for that period until we came into the picture, and then we came in and showed them what a real
You didn't
marketing
know
infrastructure looks like.
Fred from accounting also was a doppelganger himself for marketing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that is always an interesting proposition. And again, like you say, you have to go through the naysaying and the sort of like, will it work? Oh, it takes too long. Well, it's like you didn't do it for 35 years. So there will be some catch up involved in how you position yourself in this space. But fast forward, they're doing product design. They have expanded into national media in a way that they never had before. They have new collaborators. They have, new offices, new opportunities. So all of that probably took, I don't know, 18 months after 35 years. I would say that those are pretty good
Yeah.
returns, right?
Yeah.
So going in and also just having that rapport and that confidence level to speak to a founder on that level, like, okay, you can do this. There will be some pain points. There might be a little churn. I think that the markets we work in, you've got the very established seasoned team, and then you have a lot of juniors or people coming up in the ranks. And so they are very motivated to see somebody who wants to reinvigorate basically their company, right? So we're going to get buy-in there pretty quickly. However, they don't own the relationships or the skill sets, right, that the senior members do, or somebody like me. So people always say, like, I used to bring in my whole team of 20 people, and they would say, oh, it looks like a school classroom. It was too much for the owners of these companies, but I was training them simultaneously. So, to stay innovative, obviously, I have to constantly upskill and hire and retain the right people internally, but also externally, client side, right? Because you don't want to be spinning your wheels with a company you can't achieve success for. So that innovation, I think, goes both ways. But the past 4 years, back to my earlier point, we were working with a lot of startups or younger companies. And when I say younger, I mean maybe 5 or 10 years if they were around even that long, just to help them stay in business, right, during that period. So coming back into the larger organizations, I think there is a bit of excitement, but there's also fatigue, right? Because depending on where you live, there's this sort of hybrid in the office, out of the office presence, and it has affected communication and how people kind of embrace what it is we're doing. So it begs for really communication as an art form, which means almost over communicating on a daily basis.
That piece right there, the communication, is probably centerpiece to where I want to go with my next line of question, because whether you're communicating internally to your team or communicating externally to your buyers, a lot of times, and you operate in the branding world, what I see most is that people just have the wrong messaging. So that my whole business is built on that, is how do you teach a business to clarify, crystallize their messaging so that you're speaking to the correct audience. In your world, in 22 years of amazing experience, how can you simplify, crystallize? Do you have any tips that you recommend for businesses that are struggling with either connecting with the right buyer, connecting internally with their staff, et cetera, to crystallize that messaging?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to say it's a formula, but we do this to solve this for this group of people. And it really is almost that simple, is
Almost
crystallizing.
like the unique value proposition concept.
Very much so, because again, we're operating in a very noisy environment. If you look at the amount of media, when I say media, I just mean anything you read from the outside world. It could be an ad, it can be an article, it can be an email, just the amount of overstimulation that the average consumer or professional deals with daily. It's a massive amount of information. So to really cut through and penetrate, if you will, and then sustain that for traction or recognition value purposes, you really have to keep it simple.
Mm.
And I think it's interesting because we do work with so many technical professionals, engineers, whether it's UX or what have you, is to have a conversation that's meaningful, distilling a lot of complexity or complex concepts into easy to understand marketable messages. So when you give an example of poor messaging, give me an example of what you would call poor messaging. And let me see if I can decipher it.
A chiropractor. I'll use a chiropractor as an example, and their messaging is centered around basically just selling all the time. Come buy from us. Come get a free service. Come in and get your back adjusted. There was no value in what they were offering their audience. Not on their website, not on their social media. It was just always like sell, 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 sell. Come see me. And there's 1,000 of you doing the exact same thing, right? We talked about this earlier. There's a lot of noise. So how do you crystallize that message so that the person who's struggling with whatever problem that you're going to solve, here's your solution when you're talking about it, as opposed to just being sold to all the time?
Right. Well, in that instance, because it's a service provider, I would say integrity would be a big part of it. Healing would obviously be paramount, and leveraging credentials. That profession in particular kind of suffers sometimes from a lack of credibility. So
Sure.
I think that would be an easy fix, assuming, you had the right doctor that was communicating effectively as
Mhm.
opposed to selling. So yeah,
But
people don't necessarily want to be sold to. I mean, I think there's a cynicism in American culture, like, oh, people don't believe it unless they're being marketed to. And I think, truthfully, the really smart consumers will do their research and seek it out. They
yeah,
want to synthesize a lot of information through that noisy environment and make their own decisions. I mean, yes, advertising certainly is valuable. Yes, branding is paramount, because again, going back to Gen Z, if they see something that is not designed properly, they won't even take it seriously. They're
yeah.
like, this is just junk, forget it. So companies that don't engage, to your point, on social or engage in branding really do so to that they're not going to be around for long. Let's put it that
Agreed.
way.
Agreed. I have a question. So each week I take questions on my social media from followers, and this is a question that I'm going to ask you. With all the noise on social media online, it's tough for brands to get noticed, little brands like us. How do you create a brand story that not only grabs the attention, but also stays meaningful to my audience over time?
Well, again, it goes back to that authenticity. And I like talking about significance versus success because they're two different things. And I think that they tend to be equated together. They're not mutually exclusive. But I think anybody with a small enterprise, if anything is true, I think people want to engage and support some of these smaller businesses rather than these huge monolithic corporations, quite frankly. So if you engage in not only working with a coach or branding expert such as yourself, um, and also I will speak to the value of visuals since you're a professional photographer, that aspect of visual storytelling, words are words unless you attach them to the kind of compelling visual narrative. So it's almost less is more in a sense, right?
Sure. You know what I appreciate most about you so far, aside from all the wisdom you've dropping, is that you actually came prepared to the podcast. You did a little research on me. You sort of know who I am and what I'm doing, and I really appreciate that. I'm actually honored. So thank you for taking the time to
Pleasure.
uncover that.
Thank you.
Well, it says a lot about who you are. So a little person like myself, you're over here taking the time to research that, and even though you've got a bazillion other things to do, so I really appreciate that. You just said something that I want to break down a little bit for in the last part of our show: significance versus success. So significance for me is about building something lasting, meaningful, having an impact on others, whether it's society, your business, your employees, your family, your relationships. And success is centered around more of a tangible, materialistic piece in a sense. But success is a really ambiguous term because you can have success and have nothing in terms of monetary value, right? So can
It
you
can
break
be
those two
fleeting.
down?
Yes,
Yeah.
it can
Can
be
you break
fleeting.
those?
And
Yeah. Can you
when
break those two
when
down
you're
for me?
yes, I significance is about legacy and giving back, right? Creating something that has a lasting value, and that can be to you too, as the primary or principal at your own firm, right? I mean, maybe you will exit at some point. You won't necessarily sell your business, but maybe you'll even hand it down to successive people within your organization. So, building something that has a lasting impact, I think, is really the forward movement of business. And that's not to sound overly philosophical, but I think we work with businesses that have been, some businesses we work with have been around for over 100 years, 120 years, which, is saying something. So
Hmm.
there is a, a circling back, right? I mean, and as with as many technological tools as we have to make ourselves successful, the significance still comes from the human aspect. I read a really great thing in the New York Times yesterday. There's a popular writer, and her work was used to train Chat GPT against her knowledge or compensation. And so the Times challenged her to write a story, and then Chat GPT would write a story. And they published both to let readers understand which one had the more intrinsic um, compelling value to readers. And it turned out that the human generated one, because she had taken the time to do actual human as opposed to learn machine research. Um, and you can look this up too. It's on the public record. Obviously, it was published yesterday. Was that much more interesting. So, I mean, I do think that if we as creatives learn how to harness all these technological tools, we really can create, lasting significance.
Hmm. So success and significance, they're not mutually exclusive, and they represent different values and different pursuits for the individual, depending upon who it is.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's subjective, right? But I'm talking about organizationally, if you're going to build something of lasting value, right? That's um, takes a concerted effort. And that's different than just putting out press releases and generating publicity, right? Or
Yeah.
even having a beautiful logo and going through that whole exercise, which, as you know, can be a fun experience or it can be a really lengthy, uncomfortable one, depending on what the company sort of culture is. So
Yeah.
again, my premise in creating that significance versus success paradigm is surrounding yourself with experts, right? So you don't have to be an expert at every single thing, but you do need, as a business owner, operator, CEO, whatever you are, in this professional realm, surrounding yourself with all kinds of resources that help you be the healthiest, the smartest, the most informed, right? How to upskill, creating a rapport with individuals who are oftentimes maybe more quote unquote significant or successful than you are. And again, making that definition for yourself as opposed to kind of going through the motions and then ending up at a certain point in your career saying, well, was this significant? Am I successful? Right. So again, it goes back to that philosophy, but it's part and parcel of the larger exercise. And it has been successful in company after company.
How does someone like a Courtney Lukitsch surround herself with the pedigree and years of experience that you have? How does someone like you surround themselves with smarter, more capable, more successful people?
Yeah, I am always taking symposiums, seminars, webinars, conferences, opportunities to engage at a high level and also have conversations like these to um, share the fact that there's more of us out there than, it may feel like at times when you're operating a business at a high level.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just always being curious about what's the next new um, opportunity, really. I mean, attending conferences over the past 4 years, particularly since everything was slightly bifurcated throughout the country, just seeing the level of innovation and research and things that are happening to solve, climate issues and currency issues and water issues, and it's very inspiring when you avail yourself of those kind of connections. Let's put it that way.
Hmm. You are a byproduct of the people you hang around with in every
Yes.
way, shape, and form, whether it's your relationships or your family or your peers or your colleagues or just your drinking buddies. So I didn't learn that lesson until later in my life, and I'm glad I did because I'm surrounded now by some really amazing people. But I think early on in my life, I was a true solopreneur in the sense that I think I can navigate this by myself, and my ego was big enough that I'm like, I can validate this by myself. It wasn't until I started really encountering I started encountering resistance and things that I had to stop and take a look and be like, okay, I might not have all the answers. There's probably a lot of people out there that are way smarter than me, way more successful than me. And it wasn't until I understood that clearly that I really started seeing real gains in my life as a whole. So really
No, I
appreciate you
think
saying
that's a
that.
good point. I think about often working with founders that started their company when they were in their, say, late 20s, and now they've been around for 10 or 20 years. But I always try to get into that mindset, right? Of, okay, this is how you communicate with somebody who's 25. This is how you communicate with somebody who's 35, 45, right? Because there are these milestones. And to your point, of course, we were all, young and went for it. Or at least
Yeah.
I think I started my business when I was 34 or something like that. So you have that go for it mentality. You're fearless. And I think that's good. It protects you, right? And then
Yeah.
later you're like, oh, wow, I could have done things a little differently back then, but now I'm doing them right. So, and I'm helping a lot of people. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
Nobody has all the answers. So
Definitely. Looking back at your 22-year career as an entrepreneur, now as a CEO of a very successful company, if you were to look at some of the core lessons that you've learned through this process, what might those be?
lessons or just values? I mean, always be honest. Don't try to varnish or cover up a situation that is not positive. Try to shed light and be a force of positivity. I think it's probably takes as much energy to be positive as it does to be negative. And that's not to say you shouldn't have criteria or high standards, but also this empathy, right? Both for your clients who you're dealing with, and also to your point, you're somebody who likes to work fast, as do I. Not everybody wants to move that quickly. So that's one lesson I learned, is to slow down and try to find a pace that works for everybody.
Mm,
However, as the person in charge of being transformative, we have to be 5 or 10 steps ahead,
hmm.
right? So that's the strategy part, is we don't really get to spend too much time uh, making tough decisions, right? Or calling things out. And again, there's a lot of companies that are around where they want somebody to just come in and sort of be the cheerleader, and that's great. And we like to fulfill that role too, like motivators, inspirational. But transformation doesn't happen without some tough decision making and changes, evolution or elevation, as we like to call it. So.
Courtney, that was a very thoughtful conversation. I appreciate you coming on the Branding Laboratory today. If you want to connect with Courtney, you can find her at gothampr.com. That's Gotham like Batman, Gotham. The show notes will be below when the show is published. Or you can also find her on LinkedIn at Courtney M. Lukitsch. That's Courtney M as in Mary Lukitsch. Is that right? Did I mess that up? Is that good?
The M is for Michelle, but yeah, you got it right.
There was a lot of things that we covered today on the show, from philosophy to vertical and horizontal business strategies to branding and reputation marketing. I mean, we literally covered the gamut. I hope there was a few morsels for you listeners out there that you can glean from the call. And if you did enjoy the show, drop us some comments. If you would like to be submitting a question for our next guest, you can do that in the comments below. We respond to everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review if you enjoyed the show. Connect with us on social media. And until next time, I'm Deevo, the brand storyteller. This is Courtney Lukitsch with Gotham PR. We're grateful that you joined us today on the Branding Laboratory. I know you have choices when it comes to podcasts, literally millions of them. So thank you for giving us an hour of your time, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Well, that was a fantastic conversation. There were so many different things that we touched on, and I really appreciate Courtney's time and energy. And if you're a branding extraordinaire, you're a marketing genius, or you are just someone generally interested in growing and scaling your business, we would love to hear from you. If you go to www.thebrandinglaboratory.com or find me at www.thebrandstoryteller.com, there's an application under the podcast section where you can fill out or drop us a DM on social. Whatever it is, we'd love to hear from you. It's people like you and the listeners like you that are going to make this show successful, and I really appreciate the time and the energy that you've given to listening in today. If there's anything else that you would like to hear, topics, guests that you'd like to recommend, drop me a DM. We would love to hear from them. And until then, sayonara. Thanks for tuning in to the Branding Laboratory. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Connect with us on social media for more branding tips and insights. And remember, your story matters. Until next time, keep building and sharing your unique brand story. I'll see you soon.